Hello, Pack. There is a hall in Ironhold where the torches burn lower than they should, and the wolves who live there have learned not to ask why. The Alpha King Soren has kept that hall for 11 years. He has ruled it with the kind of stillness that passes for strength until you get close enough to see the difference. He has not named a mate. He has not explained why. He has simply stood at the center of that dimming hall and held everything together by refusing to let anything in. Her name is Vesna. She arrived at Ironhold with a herbalist's satchel, a list of plants she needed from the northern slope, and no idea that the things she was about to save would change the shape of her life entirely. She came to gather moonbloom and steep what 3 trained healers had already failed to brew. She had no idea she was also walking into the answer to a question the king had stopped letting himself ask. Let's begin. Vesna had been traveling for 4 days when the Ironhold gate came into view, and she almost didn't stop. The commission had come through the apothecary network, a request for a specialist in rare preparations, someone who knew moonbloom at altitude and could work with the northern varietal, which behaved differently than the lowland strain and had broken 2 healers of formulations already. The third had simply left without explanation. The letter described the patient in careful, neutral language. A child, 8 years old, fever that had not broken in 3 weeks. No further details were offered, which told Vesna more than the letter intended. She had packed for a week and told her neighbor to water the seedlings. The gate guard looked at her the way gate guards often looked at her, with a particular assessment that moved from her satchel to her face and back, trying to determine which category she belonged to: traveling herbalist. No pack affiliation, no escort. She had learned not to fill the silence that followed. Vesna of the Greyvale practice, she said. I was sent for. He checked a list. Let her through without ceremony. The courtyard of Ironhold was larger than she'd expected and colder. The stone held the cold the way old stone does, not as a temperature, but as a fact. Wolves moved through the space with the practiced efficiency of a pack that knew its routines, and none of them looked at her until one did. She was crossing toward the main hall entrance when the wolf nearest the eastern wall turned its head, then the one beside it. Then, in a ripple that moved outward from where she was standing, like a stone dropped into still water, they turned, not toward the gate, toward her, and one by one, heads lowered. Vesna stopped walking. She had worked in 7 different pack territories in the last 3 years. She had seen pack wolves acknowledge visitors, acknowledge returning members, acknowledge their own alpha. She had never seen anything like this. The bowing moved through the courtyard in a slow, unmistakable wave. The great wolves of Ironhold creatures, bred for war and bred for cold, lowering their heads toward a traveling herbalist with mud on her boots. She stood very still and waited for it to stop. It didn't stop quickly. When it finally settled, she looked up and found a man standing at the top of the main steps. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read from that distance. Not surprise exactly, more like the face of someone who has been waiting for a sound they didn't expect to actually hear. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in the practical dark wool of someone who worked in the cold rather than stood above it. His eyes were gray. The distance between them was 30 feet, and something else she didn't have a name for. He didn't bow. He didn't speak. He simply stood there watching, and then turned and went inside. Vesna filed it away without knowing why. A steward named Petra met her at the door and led her through corridors that smelled of pine resin and old stone. She was given a workroom adjacent to the sick room, a practical choice, good ventilation, a window that faced north where the light was even. The sick room itself was small and very warm, the fire built high, and in the center of it, a child lay in a bed that was too large for him. He was small for 8. His skin had the particular translucency of a fever that had been running too long, and his breathing had the shallow quality of something that had been fighting for weeks and was beginning to lose track of why. His name was Emmerich. He was, Petra told her in a low voice, the son of the king's closest lieutenant, who had died in a border skirmish 4 months ago. The king had taken him in. Vesna set her satchel on the workroom table and began unpacking. She did not ask what the previous 3 healers had tried. She had read the notes Petra provided, and she understood the problem. Moon bloom at altitude developed a secondary compound that the lowland preparations didn't account for, a bitterness that, if not properly neutralized before steeping, would bind to the fever compound rather than break it. The healers had been working from a lowland formula. It was the correct formula for the wrong plant. She asked for a mortar, a copper pot, and access to the northern slope in the morning. She asked for nothing else. That night she worked until the fire burned low, and she let it. She saw the king twice in the first 3 days, and both times at a distance. The first was in the corridor outside the sick room, late. On the second night, she had come out to refill her water pitcher and found him standing at the end of the hall with his back to her, one hand flat against the stone wall. He was not doing anything. He was simply standing there in the way that some people stand when they have run out of places to put the weight of something. She turned around and went back inside without speaking, and she heard him leave a few minutes later. The second was in the courtyard the following morning, when she went out to check the northern slope access route. He was across the yard speaking with 2 men she didn't recognize, and he stopped mid-sentence when she came through the door. The men he was speaking with turned to look at what had interrupted him. He said something to them, and they resumed the conversation. But his gaze tracked her across the courtyard until she passed through the far gate, and she knew it because she felt it the way you feel a fire at your back. Not heat exactly, just the awareness of something burning in your direction. She filed that away, too. The moon bloom on the northern slope was exactly what she'd hoped for. The northern varietal, in good condition, harvested at the right stage. She took what she needed and was back in her workroom by mid-morning. The preparation took the better part of the day. The neutralizing step alone required 4 hours of controlled temperature and 3 additions of the ash compound she prepared the night before. She did not rush it. Rushing it was how you got the wrong result. By evening, she had a preparation she trusted. She brought it to Emmerich herself, sat beside him while he drank it, and told him it tasted like pine and that pine was good for you. He looked at her with the serious eyes of a child who has been in bed for 3 weeks and has developed opinions about adults who tell him things. She didn't argue. She refilled his cup and waited. The fever broke on the 4th day, not dramatically. Fevers rarely broke dramatically when they were done properly. They lowered, and then they lowered more. And then, at some point, you pressed the back of your hand to a child's forehead and realized the fire had gone out. Emmerich's fever broke like that, quietly, between one check and the next. And when Vesna came in at dawn and found him sitting up in bed asking for food, she stood in the doorway for a moment and let herself feel the particular satisfaction of a thing done correctly. Petra was in the corridor. Vesna told her. Petra went to find the king. She was not prepared for what happened next. She was still in the sick room, helping Emmerich with a bowl of broth, when she heard it. Not a sound, exactly. More change in the quality of the air in the corridor, a shift in pressure, the way a room changes when something significant has entered it. She set the broth down and went to the door. The corridor was full of wolves, not just the household wolves. All of them, it seemed, the great animals of Ironhold, filling the hall from the sick-room door, back toward the main courtyard, and every one of them had lowered its head. Not in the slow ripple she'd seen in the courtyard on her arrival. This was immediate, collective, absolute. The wolves of Ironhold were bowing to the woman who had saved the boy their king had taken in, and the sound of it was the sound of nothing, 100 creatures going perfectly, reverently still. And at the end of the corridor, just visible through the gathered wolves, Soren stood. He was looking at her. Then he did something she had not expected from a man who had watched her from 30 feet and turned away without speaking. He lowered his head. Not the deep bow of the wolves. Something smaller, more deliberate, more costly. The particular acknowledgement of a man who does not bow easily and knows it. Emmerich from inside the sick room said, "Can I have more broth?" Vesna went back inside and got it for him. She was sitting in the workroom that evening, cleaning her instruments and making notes in her preparation log, when the knock came. It was a quiet knock, not tentative, but considered. The kind of knock that had decided to happen before it arrived at the door. "Come in," she said. Soren came in. He was, up close, the kind of man who made rooms feel differently proportioned, not because he was the largest person in them, but because he moved through space with the particular economy of someone who has learned that stillness is more useful than motion. He looked at her workroom, the way people look at spaces they haven't been invited into before, briefly taking inventory, filing it away. Then he looked at her. "He's asking for a second bowl," Soren said. "Good," she said. "Let him have it, small portions, until tomorrow. Then we can increase." He nodded. He didn't leave. She set down the instrument she was cleaning and waited. "The others couldn't do it," he said. Not an accusation. More like a thing he was examining, turning over, not sure what to do with. "They were using the wrong preparation," she said. "The northern varietal has a secondary compound. It needs to be neutralized before the steep. It's not intuitive unless you've worked with it. And you have. My teacher had a practice near the high passes. I spent 4 winters there." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his expression, not quite a shift, more like the suggestion of a fraction of movement that didn't complete itself. "What do you need," he said, "to finish the course of treatment?" "A week," she said. "Maybe 10 days. The fever is gone, but the underlying weakness needs support. I have most of what I need. I'll want fresh willow bark from the lower slope and access to the drying room. You'll have them." He turned to go. "King Soren," she said. He stopped. "He's going to be all right." She said it plainly, the way she said things that were true and needed to be said without decoration. "I want you to know that." The silence stretched for a moment. He was facing the door, not her, and she could see the line of his jaw and the particular stillness of a man who has been holding something for a long time and is not sure how to put it down. "Thank you," he said. Flat and final, no explanation offered, none needed. He left, and she went back to her notes. On the 5th day, Emmerich decided he was well enough to have opinions about his recovery, and his primary opinion was that he was bored. Vesna found him sitting up in bed with a look on his face that she recognized as the specific expression of a child who has decided that the adults around him are not moving fast enough. She told him he could sit in the chair by the window for an hour. He told her he wanted to go to the courtyard. She told him the chair. He considered this negotiation and accepted it with the air of someone banking the concession for later use. She brought the chair closer to the window and let him watch the courtyard below. He watched it with the focused attention of someone who had been absent from the world for 3 weeks and was reacquainting himself with its details. "He comes out at the same time every morning," Emmerich said. "Who does?" "Soren." He said the name without the title, with the easy familiarity of a child who has been in someone's household long enough to stop performing deference. "He checks the east wall first, then the gate, then he talks to Aldrich, that's the big one with the gray beard, and then he goes back inside." Every morning Vesna looked out the window. Soren was crossing the courtyard below precisely as described, and she watched him stop at the east wall and look up at the parapet with the focused attention of a man who was checking something specific. He moved efficiently. He didn't linger. "You watch him a lot," she said. "There's not much else to watch from a sickbed," Emmerich said. Then, "He came every night. When I was sick he sat in the chair by the door. He didn't think I knew, but I did." Vesna said nothing. He doesn't talk much, Emmerich added, but he stayed. She filed that away. The drawing room was in the eastern wing, a long, narrow space with good airflow and racks for hanging herbs. She went there in the afternoons to check her preparations, and on the 6th day she arrived to find that someone had already sorted and hung the willow bark she'd requested, tied in the small bundles she preferred, in the order she would use them. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the careful work. Petra, when asked, said she hadn't done it. The council met on the 7th day, and Vesna was not invited, which was fine. She had no interest in pack councils. She was there to finish a course of treatment, not to attend meetings. She heard about it from Emmerich, who had graduated from the chair to short walks in the corridor and had developed the particular skill of small children in large households, the ability to be overlooked while absorbing everything. "They're talking about you," he said with the directness of someone who has not yet learned to soften information. "Are they? Elder Cavan says it's not natural. That 3 trained healers couldn't do it, and then you just walked in and did." He paused. "I don't think he means it as a compliment." "No," she agreed. "He probably doesn't. He also said something about your pack affiliation, or the lack of it." Emmerich looked at her with the evaluating eyes of a child who has been around adults long enough to understand subtext. "He thinks you're dangerous. What do you think?" He considered this seriously. "I think you made the broth taste better than anyone else has," he said, "and I think dangerous people don't usually do that." She almost smiled. "Go back to your room," she said. "You've been standing for 20 minutes. He went, with the air of someone who had delivered his report and considered his duty done. That evening, the summons came. It was politely worded, the way things are politely worded when the politeness is a formality and the request is not actually optional. The council wished to speak with her tomorrow morning, the formal hall. She folded the note and set it on her workroom table. She had been in formal halls before. She had been questioned by councils before. She knew what this was. The particular machinery of institutional suspicion, the way closed systems respond to things that work when the closed system's methods have failed. It was not comfortable, but it was not new. She checked Emmerich's evening dose, made sure the fire in his room was properly banked, and went to bed. The formal hall of Ironhold was built from the same dark stone as everything else in the fortress. But here the stone had been carved, old pack symbols along the upper walls, the kind that predated the current council by several generations. The council table was long and occupied by 7 people, of whom Elder Cavan was the most immediately visible, not because he was the largest, but because he was the kind of man who had learned to take up more space than his body required. He had the smooth voice and careful enunciation of someone who had spent years making reasonable-sounding arguments for unreasonable positions. Soren sat at the head of the table. He was watching her when she came in, and he didn't look away when she looked back. She stood at the end of the table and waited. Elder Cavan began. He was thorough. She gave him that. He covered her lack of pack affiliation, the unusual nature of her success, the question of what methods she had used that 3 trained healers had not, and the broader concern, voiced with great reasonableness, about what it might mean for Ironhold to be seen as dependent on outside practitioners of uncertain provenance. He did not say the word dangerous. He didn't need to. When he finished, the hall was quiet. Vesna said, "The northern moon bloom has a secondary compound that the lowland preparation doesn't account for. The 3 healers who came before me were trained in lowland methods. They used the correct formula for the wrong plant. I used the correct formula for the right plant. That's the whole of it." "That may be," Elder Cavan said, with the particular patience of someone who has already decided the answer and is waiting for the question to catch up. "But the question of your ongoing presence here, the child's course of treatment, is not finished," Vesna said. "He needs another week of support preparation. If you remove me before that's done, the fever may return. The underlying weakness hasn't resolved. There are other healers who could. 3 of them already tried," she said. Not sharp, just precise. I'm not saying that to be difficult. I'm saying it because it's true, and because the boy's health is what matters here, not my provenance. The hall was quiet again. Soren spoke. He said, "She stays," 2 words, flat and final. No explanation offered, none needed. Elder Cavan's careful expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A small recalibration, the kind that happens when a man realizes the argument he prepared is not going to be useful today. "Of course," he said smoothly. "We simply wanted to ensure." "She stays," Soren said again, and this time it was not a repetition. It was a door closing. "Until the treatment is complete and she chooses to leave. That's the end of it." He looked at Vesna then, and there was something in his gray eyes that she hadn't seen there before. Not apology exactly, but acknowledgement. An awareness that she had been brought into a room to be assessed, and had been assessed by someone with authority over the room, and that he found it distasteful. She gave him a small nod. She didn't thank him. It wasn't thanks that was called for. She walked out of the formal hall, and behind her she heard Elder Cavan begin to speak again, and she heard Soren's voice cut across it in a tone that didn't carry, but clearly didn't need to. She went back to the workroom and made notes until her hands stopped feeling like they wanted to do something else. That night she was in the corridor outside the drawing room when she heard footsteps and looked up to find Soren coming from the opposite direction. They both stopped. The corridor was narrow. The torch between them threw uneven light. "The council?" he began. "Don't apologize," she said. He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. "Not much, just a fraction." "I wasn't going to," he said. "Good." She looked at him steadily. "Then what were you going to say?" A pause. He seemed to be picking up words and putting them down again, the way he did with everything, as if each word had been examined before being set down. "I was going to say that Emmerich asked if you would come in the morning. He wants to show you something he's been drawing." The simplicity of it caught her off guard. She'd been braced for politics and got a child's drawing instead. "I'll come in the morning," she said. He nodded. He didn't move immediately, and neither did she. And the torch between them burned the way torches burn in narrow corridors, too close, too warm, making the space feel smaller than it was. "You sorted the willow bark," she said. It wasn't a question. He didn't confirm it. He also didn't deny it. He said, "You had a particular way of bundling the first batch. I tried to match it." She looked at him for a moment. The man who checked the east wall every morning and sat in a chair by a sick boy's door at night and sorted herbs in a drawing room in the afternoon because he had noticed how she bundled them. "You matched it well," she said. He left. She stood in the corridor for a while, after listening to the torchlight. On the 8th day, Emmerich showed her a drawing of a wolf that was, he explained with great seriousness, specifically the largest wolf in the Ironhold pack, whose name was Dusk, and who had been his favorite since he arrived. The drawing had the particular quality of a child who draws with commitment rather than skill. Enormous, confident lines, a tail that took up most of the page. Vesna told him it was very accurate. He looked pleased. Soren came in while she was still there, which she suspected was not accidental. He looked at the drawing and said, with the flatness of a man who has learned to be careful with humor, "Dusk's tail is not quite that large." "It is from where I sit," Emmerich said. Soren looked at Vesna. She looked back. Something almost happened in the space between them. Not quite a smile, close enough. He stayed for an hour. He sat in the chair by the door, the same chair Emmerich had described, and he listened while Emmerich talked about the wolves and the courtyard and the things he'd been watching from the window. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. He was the kind of man whose presence was its own form of communication, and Emmerich, who had been watching him from a sickbed for 3 weeks, knew how to read it. Vesna worked on her preparation notes and let herself be in the room without analyzing it. The 9th day brought a problem. One of the Ironhold wolves, a young male who had been ranging near the northern border, came back with a wound that should have been treated 2 days earlier and hadn't been because the pack's healer was still 3 days out. Petra came to Vesna with the particular expression of someone who is asking for something they're not sure they have the right to ask for. Vesna went. The wolf was in the east stable, which was warm and smelled of horse and hay, and the particular sharp copper of old blood. The wound was a deep puncture on the left flank, already showing the early signs of the kind of infection that could move fast if you let it. She cleaned it, packed it with the preparation she trusted for deep wounds, and spent 2 hours making sure the fever she'd interrupted in the wound's early stage didn't get a second chance. The wolf, whose name she learned later was Harrow, was enormous and very still while she worked, not still from pain, still in the way of a creature that has decided to trust the hands on it. She worked carefully and told him at one point that he was going to be fine, because she believed that saying true things out loud had a function beyond communication. When she came out of the stable, Soren was in the yard. He had been there for a while, she thought. He was leaning against the far wall with his arms folded and his eyes on the stable door, and when she came out, he straightened without making a production of it. "Harrow," she said, "deep puncture, early infection. I've packed it. He needs the pack healer to check the dressing in 3 days, but he'll keep." Soren looked at her for a long moment. The afternoon light was low and cold, and it made everything in the courtyard look like something carved rather than built. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "He needed it done," she said. "You're not our healer." "He needed it done," she said again the same way, and watched him take that in. He looked at her with the particular expression she had been cataloging for 9 days, the one where something moved behind his eyes and didn't quite reach his face. The one she had started to understand was not blankness, but the opposite, a man whose control was so practiced that the feeling showed only in the effort of containing it. "What do you want?" he said, "in exchange for the work you've done here?" She understood that he didn't mean money, or rather he meant money and also something else, and he was asking her to name the something else so he could address it. "I don't want anything," she said. "I came to do a job. I've done it? Emmerich is nearly well. I'll finish the course of treatment and then I'll go. And if I asked you to stay..." The courtyard was very quiet. A wolf somewhere behind her shifted its weight. "You haven't asked," she said. He held her gaze. His jaw was set in the way she'd learned meant he was working through something he hadn't finished working through yet. He said, "No, I haven't." She nodded once and went back inside. That night she sat by her workroom window and looked at the courtyard below and thought about the particular shape of a man who has learned to want nothing because wanting things has cost him something he doesn't talk about. She thought about the way he sorted herbs in the afternoon. She thought about the chair by the sick boy's door. She thought about the wolves bowing in the courtyard on the day she arrived, and the fact that she still didn't entirely understand what it had meant. On the 10th day, she asked Petra. Petra was a practical woman who had been running the Ironhold household for 12 years and had developed the particular economy of speech that comes from managing a lot of people who think they're more complicated than they are. She looked at Vesna's question with the expression of someone who has been waiting for it. "The pack wolves bow to the Alpha King," Petra said, "and to his mate." Vesna said nothing. "They bowed to you on the first day," Petra said. "Before you'd done anything, before the boy was healed, they bowed the way they bow to a mate." "I'm not his mate," Vesna said. "No," Petra agreed. "Not yet." She paused. "He hasn't named it." "But the bond, the wolves feel it before the naming. They always have." She looked at Vesna with the clear-eyed practicality of someone who has seen this before. "The question is whether either of you is going to do anything about it." Vesna went back to her workroom and sat with that for a long time. She thought about what it meant to have a body that knew something before the mind permitted it. She thought about the pools she'd been cataloging and filing away for 10 days. Not attraction exactly, more like orientation, the way a compass needle doesn't decide to point north. It simply does. She thought about the fact that she had been filing it away instead of looking at it directly. And she thought about what that said. She went to find him. He was in the east corridor, the one with the old pack symbols carved into the upper walls, and he was alone. She had to sense that he had been walking rather than going anywhere, the way people walk when they're working something out and need their body occupied. He stopped when he saw her. "Tell me about the wound," she said. He looked at her. "What wound? The one that made you stop naming things." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking to be cruel. I'm asking because I need to understand what I'm walking into, and I think you owe me that." The corridor was very still. The torch at the far end threw long shadows. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Her name was Alara." He said it the way he said everything, flat and final. But this time the flatness cost him something visible. "She was my mate, or she was going to be. We had named the bond. The ceremony was set." He paused. "She left 3 days before it, crossed into the Veil territory and didn't come back. She sent a letter that said she had made a mistake, and she was sorry." Vesna waited. "I have not named anything since," he said. "I decided it was cleaner." "Cleaner," she repeated. "Less risk of—" He stopped, started again. "I told myself the bond was a mistake, that what I had felt was not what I thought it was, that I had been wrong." He looked at her, and for the first time in 10 days the control in his face was not quite sufficient to the task. Something underneath it was visible, not broken, but present. "I was very convincing for a long time, and now," she said. "And now you arrived," he said, "and the wolves bowed before you'd done anything, and I stood at the top of those steps and felt something I decided I was done feeling, and I have been trying to determine what to do about that for 10 days. She looked at him, the man who sorted herbs and sat by a child's door and said 2 words in a council meeting and meant them as a wall and a declaration at once. "The wolves bowed because of the bond," she said. "Not because of what I did for Emmerich?" "Yes." "And you knew that on the first day?" "Yes." "And you said nothing?" "I didn't know," he said. "And the precision of it was careful. If you felt it. And I didn't know if I had the right to name it before I was certain it was real, and not—" He stopped. "Not another mistake." She understood then. "Not a man who didn't feel things." A man who felt things with the kind of depth that made a single loss into a decade of silence, and who had decided that silence was preferable to the risk of being wrong again. She said, "I felt it." He went very still. "I've been filing it away," she said. "That's what I do when I don't know what to do with something. I file it and I keep working. But I felt it on the first day, and I felt it every day since. And I think—" She paused, choosing the words the way he did, picking them up and setting them down. "I think it's real. I think it was real from the beginning. And I think you've been standing in that corridor at night and sorting herbs in the afternoon and sitting by a child's door because you knew it too, and you were trying to figure out what to do." The torch at the far end of the corridor was burning low. "I was trying," he said slowly, "to figure out if you would let me." The stillness of the corridor was the stillness of something that had been waiting for a long time to stop waiting. She said, "Ask me." He took a breath. It was a small thing, barely visible, but she had learned to read small things on him, and she knew what it cost. He said, "Will you let me name it?" "Yes," she said. He didn't move toward her immediately. He stood in the corridor, with the old symbols carved into the stone above him, and looked at her with the expression of a man who has put down something very heavy and is not yet sure what to do with his hands. "I should have asked on the first day," he said. "You weren't ready on the first day," she said. "Neither was I." Something in his face shifted. The fraction of movement she'd been watching for 10 days, the one that almost completed itself and never did. This time it completed, not a smile exactly. Something quieter and more permanent than a smile. The stillness of something that had finally stopped bracing. "Emmerich is going to be insufferable about this," he said. "He already knows," she said. "He's been watching from the window." He looked at her. She looked back. The torch burned low between them, and neither of them moved to rebuild it, and the corridor was warm enough without it. The ceremony was 3 days later. Ironhold's pack gathered in the main courtyard at mid-morning, when the frost was still on the stone and the light came low and clean from the east. It was not a large ceremony by the standards of some packs, no elaborate ritual, no hours of formal procedure. Pack law for bond naming was simple. The Alpha King named the bond before witnesses, the mate accepted, and the pack acknowledged. That was the whole of it. What made this one different was what happened before Soren spoke. Vesna came into the courtyard, and the wolves began to bow. Not in the slow ripple of her first arrival. This time it was immediate, total, the entire pack going still and then lowering in a single movement that swept the courtyard like a tide coming in. The great wolves of Ironhold, every one of them, heads down in the frost in the morning light. Elder Cabin, standing at the edge of the gathering, went very carefully neutral. Emmerich, standing beside Petra near the eastern wall with a blanket around his shoulders because Vesna had insisted, watched with the satisfied expression of a child who has been right about something for some time and is now watching the adults catch up. Soren stood at the center of the courtyard. He was not dressed for ceremony in any elaborate sense. The same dark wool, the same practical stillness. He waited until the bowing had settled, until the courtyard was absolutely quiet, until the only sound was the wind off the northern slope and the distant sound of the gate wolves shifting their weight. Then he said, "Her name is Vesna. She came to this territory 11 days ago with the herbalist's satchel and a preparation that 3 trained healers couldn't manage. And she saved a child who matters to this pack. She did it without asking for anything in return. She did it because it needed doing." He paused. "The bond between us is real," he said. "It has been real since the first day. I am naming it now before this pack because it is true and because it has been true long enough that the only thing left is to say it out loud." He looked at her. "Vesna," he said. Just her name, the way he said everything, flat and final and entirely meant. She looked back at him across the frost-covered courtyard, at the man who sorted herbs in the afternoon and sat by a child's door at night, and had spent 3 years deciding that silence was cleaner than risk, and who was standing in front of his entire pack, naming the thing he had been most afraid to name. She said, "I accept." The courtyard did not erupt. There was no roar, no dramatic sound. What happened was quieter than that and more permanent. The pack, all of them, lifted their heads, and then the sound began, low, sustained, the particular resonance of wolves, acknowledging something true. It moved through the courtyard and up the walls and out over the northern slope, and it was the sound of 100 creatures who had known something for 11 days, finally hearing it named. Emmerich from the eastern wall said something to Petra in a low voice. Petra looked like she was trying not to smile. Elder Cavan said nothing at all. Soren crossed the courtyard and stopped in front of her, and up close his eyes went a gray of old stone in morning light. And the expression on his face was the one she had been watching for 11 days, the one that had been almost completing and never quite finishing. It was finished now, fully present, fully visible, the stillness of a man who has stopped bracing for the thing he wanted to stop bracing for. "The drying room," he said, "is yours. as long as you want it. I'll need to expand it, she said. The northern slope has more than moonbloom. I've been cataloging. I know, he said. I read your notes. She looked at him. You read my preparation notes. I wanted to understand what you were doing. A pause. And I wanted an excuse to spend time in the workroom when you weren't there. She held that for a moment. Then she said, That is a very strange thing to admit in front of your entire pack. They already knew, he said. Emmerich told everyone. From the eastern wall, Emmerich called out, I told Petra. Petra told everyone. Petra, expressionless, confirmed nothing. Vesna looked up at Soren and felt the bond. Not as a metaphor, not as a thing she was interpreting, but as a fact. The same way the northern slope was a fact and the moonbloom compound was a fact. Present, real, not requiring her to decide anything about it just there. You sorted the willow bark, she said. I did, and you came to the stable. I did, and you sat by his door every night. He looked at her. Yes, you were already in, she said, before you named it. You were already all the way in. Something moved in his face. The fraction that had been completing itself for 11 days, finally, fully done. Not a smile exactly. The thing, after a smile, the quiet particular to a man who has been holding something at arm's length for 3 years and has finally, deliberately, let it come close. Yes, he said, I was. The frost on the courtyard stone caught the morning light, and the wolves of Ironhold settled around them in the easy way of creatures whose work is done, and somewhere behind her Emmerich asked Petra if there was going to be food at this ceremony, and Petra said she would look into it. And the courtyard of Ironhold was warm in the way that places become warm when the thing that was missing from them has finally arrived. Vesna thought about the first morning, the gate guard and the mud on her boots, and the commission letter that had described a child in careful, neutral language. She thought about the courtyard ripple and the man at the top of the steps who had watched her and turned away, and the 11 days of corridors and torchlight and willow bark, and a child's drawing of a wolf with an improbably large tail. She thought that she had come for the moonbloom and the boy, and had not known what else she was walking toward. She thought that sometimes the truest things are the ones you don't see until they've already been true for a while. She filed that away. Then she looked at Soren, and she let herself stop filing. Pack, here's what I want to know. Vesna came to Ironhold with a herbalist's satchel and no idea what else she was carrying. She brewed what 3 healers couldn't, saved a child who mattered, and walked into a bond she'd been feeling for 11 days before anyone named it. She didn't push. She didn't perform. She just did the work and let the truth catch up. And Soren, a man who had decided silence was cleaner than risk, sorted herbs in the afternoon and sat by a child's door at night, and named the thing he was most afraid to name in front of his entire pack, in the frost, in the morning light. My question for you is this. When do you think Soren knew? Was it the first day, standing at the top of those steps? Or was it the corridor outside the drawing room, when she asked him about the wound? Tell me in the comments. And if you know someone who needs a slow-burn story about a man who swords herbs as a love language, and a woman who files things away until she can't anymore, send this one to them. That's the best thing you can do for this channel. And I mean it. Until the next story. Pack.